The wind that whipped down the concrete canyons of Palo Alto had a raw, damp edge to it, a Pacific chill that promised a fog-choked evening. It carried the scent of eucalyptus and expensive coffee, a signature perfume of the San Francisco Peninsula. Alex Thorne felt none of it. He was sealed inside a hermetic world of recycled air, humming electronics, and the rising, coppery tang of his own adrenaline. The indicator on his primary monitor, a discrete, custom-coded icon nested in the corner of a satellite map displaying the peninsula in terrifyingly sharp resolution, had just flickered from a placid, reassuring green to a pulsing, venomous red. It wasn't a software glitch. The hardened Gentoo Linux kernel running his bespoke surveillance suite, codenamed Odin's Sight, was as stable as bedrock. This was a biometric panic alarm, slaved via a microwatt encrypted signal on the 915 MHz ISM band to the gossamer thin array of piezoelectric and chemosensitive sensors woven into the very fabric of the minimalist Danish armchair 2 miles away. That chair, a piece of artfully simple Scandinavian design, sat inside the sterile, sun-drenched facade of the Phil's Coffee on Middlefield Road, a temple of artisanal caffeine for Silicon Valley's overpaid and overstimulated elite. The chair's occupant, Dr. Lin Wei, a man whose mind contained the theoretical architecture for China's imminent quantum supremacy, was experiencing a sudden and catastrophic spike in his biometrics. Alex's eyes scanned the telemetry. Heart rate had rocketed from a resting 72 beats per minute to a frantic, fibrillating 138. Galvanic skin response was off the charts, a jagged alpine peak of pure panic. The chemosensors in the chair's fabric, sensitive enough to detect parts per billion, registered a surge of cortisol precursors in his perspiration. He was about to break, or bolt, or worse, surrender. "Julian, talk to me. Status on Oracle." Alex murmured into the subvocal microphone pressed against his larynx, a carbon fiber disc no larger than a dime. His voice was a ghost in the machine, a whisper of compressed air that was barely audible even inside the cramped, sweltering confines of the surveillance van. The vehicle, a Ford Econoline E250 painstakingly disguised as a plumbing contractor's workhorse, complete with fake scuff marks and a magnetic sign for Bay Area Flow Masters, smelled of stale, burnt coffee, the sharp metallic tang of ozone from the humming server rack, and the faint, unmistakable scent of fear, which was mostly his own. Through a shotgun microphone with a parabolic dish pointed at the cafe's quarter-inch plate glass window, the reply came back, filtered through the ambient static of clinking ceramic mugs and the high-pressure hiss of an industrial La Marzocco espresso machine. "He's gone pale, Alex. Sheet white. Eyes are darting towards the door. He just checked his watch for the 3rd time in 30 seconds. Julian Croft, the man playing the role of charismatic tech CEO, kept his voice impossibly calm, a soothing baritone that belied the chaos erupting on Alex's monitors. Julian was a hollow man, a vessel built and filled by the agency. But he was a damn good one. His own biometrics, transmitted from the custom firmware on his Tag Heuer smartwatch, were as steady as a surgeon's scalpel. Alex's fingers, long and nimble, danced across a keyboard, the keystrokes silent on the flexible membrane interface. He tasked a new directive to a KH-12 reconnaissance satellite, call sign Keyhole 15, loitering in a low orbit 160 miles overhead. The feed refreshed, the resolution good enough to read the expiration date on a parking meter. A black Audi A8L with diplomatic plates had just executed a perfect, almost robotic 3-point turn into the parking lot. It wasn't supposed to be there. Langley's pattern recognition algorithm, codenamed Cerberus, cross-referencing DMV records with known Ministry of State Security front companies, shell corporations, and a deep state watch list of consulate employees, flagged it instantly. The car parked with an unnerving precision, 2 spaces away from Lin Wei's modest Toyota Camry. A man in a dark, ill-fitting suit, a cheap, off-the-rack garment that screamed government functionary, got out of the passenger side. He didn't go into the coffee shop. He just stood there, arms crossed, a human sentinel watching the front door, waiting. The classic spotter. Abort, Alex said, the single word tasting like acid in his dry mouth. Julian, give him the out. The family emergency excuse. We pull the plug right now. Too late. Julian's voice came back, now tight as a piano wire. He's looking at the Audi. He's seen the spotter. He knows. He's made the connection. On the screen, Alex watched Lin Wei's biometrics perform a terrifying nosedive. The frantic panic had subsided, replaced by the icy, flatline calm of absolute resignation. It was the physiological signature of a man who knew the game was over, who could already feel the cold touch of a Beijing interrogation room, who saw his family's faces in a final, agonizing flash of despair. He was going to stand up, walk out, and surrender to save them. This was the precipice, the razor's edge where 2 years of meticulous, phantom architecture threatened to collapse into dust. The operation, codenamed Oracle's Eye, hadn't been born in the back of a van. It had been conceived 26 months prior in a soundproofed strategic programs briefing room deep in the bowels of Langley, a sterile SCIF they called the Vault. The air in the vault was always cold and tasted recycled. But the deputy director of operations seemed to carry the scent of stale smoke with him like an aura. He was a relic of the Cold War, a man who saw the world in shades of gray and conspiracy. We can't steal the blueprints anymore, the DDO had said, his voice a gravelly rasp from a lifetime of unfiltered Camel cigarettes and hushed secrets. He gestured at a classified projection showing the exponential growth of Chinese patent filings in quantum computing. The graph was a near vertical line. The blueprints are obsolete the moment they're printed. The designs are iterative. The breakthroughs are happening in the minds of their engineers, not on their servers. We need to steal the architects. We need the minds, not just the designs. And so, Ethelred Logic was born. It was the most audacious corporate legend the Central Intelligence Agency had ever constructed. It wasn't just a shell company. It was a fully realized, living, breathing entity. They'd hired a high-end branding agency from Sausalito, paying them a ludicrous 7-figure fee to design a logo, a mission statement, and a sleek, minimalist website full of meaningless corporate jargon about synergizing next-generation paradigms to unlock emergent quantum realities. They backstopped it with a dozen shell patents for non-existent quantum annealing processes, filed through a prestigious law firm in Luxembourg. They created a fictional venture capital firm, Ironwood Partners, to be its primary investor, complete with a ghost workforce of meticulously crafted LinkedIn profiles, a dummy office in the Cayman Islands, and a history of fabricated seed funding rounds that were reported on by tech blogs run by agency assets. The centerpiece of the illusion was the office itself. A 20,000-square-foot space in a gleaming glass tower in Mountain View, with a panoramic view of the Googleplex. Alex had personally overseen every detail of the build-out. Every inch of it was a stage. The server room, visible behind a wall of ballistic glass, was a Potemkin village of blinking server racks filled with gutted, powerless hardware. The real data processing happened on an AWS GovCloud server, bounced through 3 continents. The walls were impregnated with a fine mesh of fiber-optic microphones capable of picking up a whisper. The HVAC system constantly sampled the air for chemical markers of stress and deception. The custom-milled mahogany boardroom table had piezoelectric pressure sensors under its polished surface to track the nervous tapping of fingers. And the minimalist Herman Miller chairs in the interview rooms were wired to measure heart rate, posture shifts, and skin temperature. It was a polygraph test disguised as a high-tech workspace, and at the head of this phantom enterprise was Julian Croft. Alex had found him dealing blackjack in a second-rate casino in Reno, a place that smelled of cheap cigars, desperation, and spilled gin. A Stanford dropout with 2 failed startups, a mountain of debt, and the kind of easy, predatory charisma that venture capitalists either loved or loathed. He had the face of a tech messiah and the soul of a gifted con man. He was perfect. For 6 months they had drilled him, sculpted him, broken him down, and rebuilt him in a safe house in the Virginia countryside. He'd absorbed dense textbooks on quantum mechanics and machine learning until he could talk the talk with enough fluency to fool genuine experts. They taught him how to cheat a lie detector, how to spot surveillance, how to handle the custom-made smartphone that was his direct, encrypted line to Alex. He was an actor playing the role of a lifetime, and the fate of American technological superiority was resting on his opening night performance. The target profile for Ethelred Logic's recruitment was ruthlessly specific. They were hunting for unicorns, mainland Chinese nationals educated in the West, working in sensitive R&D roles for Chinese tech giants like Huawei, Baidu, or Tencent, but stationed in their American labs. These were the bridge builders, the conduits through which knowledge flowed back to Beijing. They were brilliant, ambitious, and, most importantly, potentially vulnerable. Caught between the intellectual freedom of the Valley and the rigid expectations and suffocating oversight of their masters back home, many of them chafed. Dr. Lin Wei had lit up their targeting matrix like a supernova. A prodigy from Tsinghua University with a PhD from Caltech, he was the lead architect of his company's Golden Shield quantum encryption project. His work was so advanced, it was considered a state secret, a cornerstone of the People's Liberation Army's next-generation command and control network. But OSINT and HUMINT intercepts painted a more complex picture. Lin was frustrated. His pure research was being constantly redirected for military applications. His wife and young daughter were still in Shenzhen, a velvet leash to ensure his compliance and good behavior. He posted anonymously on physics forums, lamenting the politicization of science. He was a man dying of thirst in the middle of the ocean. All Ethelred Logic had to do was offer him a glass of pure, clean water. The first contact was a masterpiece of social engineering, a quantum computing conference at the Fairmont San Jose. Julian, playing the part of the visionary CEO, gave a keynote speech that was a dazzling mix of inspirational nonsense and a few incredibly specific, technically profound observations that Alex's team had carefully lifted from a classified NSA analysis of Lin's own published papers. After the speech, Julian accidentally bumped into Lin at the hotel bar. He didn't try to recruit him. He just bought him a 25-year-old Macallan, neat, and talked, not about business, but about the beauty of pure mathematics, the tragedy of a great mind shackled to quarterly reports. He planted a seed. A week later, a third-party headhunter, another agency front, contacted Lin. A mysterious, well-funded startup called Ethelred Logic was looking for a director of advanced research. The compensation package was astronomical. More importantly, the job description was a carbon copy of Lin's wildest dreams. Total intellectual freedom, a nearly unlimited budget, and a mandate to pursue the theoretical limits of quantum engineering. The interview process was a multi-act play. The first was in the main conference room, a test of his technical chops against a panel of engineers who were actually deep-cover intelligence officers with doctorates from MIT. The second was a one-on-one with Julian in his corner office, a carefully scripted seduction designed to probe his ideological leanings and personal dissatisfactions. The building's hidden sensor array drank in every subtle cue. When Julian mentioned the phrase intellectual freedom, the AI-driven sentiment analysis software registered a 97.8% positive emotional correlation in Lin's micro-expressions and vocal tone. They had him. But as the recruitment progressed, a shadow fell over the operation. A new name began to appear in signals intelligence traffic between the Chinese consulate in San Francisco and the MSS headquarters in Beijing. Chen. He was a deputy director in the Second Bureau, the Counterintelligence Division. His specialty was hunting down Zichan traitors. His travel records showed he'd entered the U.S. 3 months ago on a diplomatic visa. He wasn't a clumsy thug, he was a phantom. Alex's counter-surveillance teams, the best in the business, couldn't get a lock on him. They found his digital ghost in the metadata of consulate communications, saw his hand in the sudden tightening of security around key Chinese engineers in the Bay Area. But they couldn't get a photograph, couldn't identify a regular pattern. He was a whisper, a rumor with a badge. He was hunting, and Alex knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in his bones, that they were his prey. The pressure forced them to accelerate the timeline. The final offer to Lin had to be made. But Lin, now committed in principle, had raised the stakes. He wouldn't defect without his family. It transformed a simple recruitment into a full-blown exfiltration, requiring a second parallel operation on the other side of the world. A high-risk, low-probability gambit to extract his wife and daughter from the heavily surveilled metropolis of Shenzhen. It was a complication Alex hated, a new variable in an already dangerously complex equation. And now, it had all come crashing down in a Palo Alto coffee shop. The man in the parking lot was Chen's. He had to be. He was the spotter. The arrest team would be moments away. Julian, listen to me very carefully. Alex's voice was now stripped of all emotion, a cold, machine-like instrument of command. The playbook is dead. We are improvising. On your phone, I've just activated the Firefly protocol. You know the drill. Understood, Julian replied. His biometrics, unlike Lin's, were rock steady. He was a professional. Alex's fingers flew. He sent a single encrypted text message. Scorch. Across the city, it triggered 2 separate, simultaneous actions. In the Ethelred Logic server room, a quiet British man who went by the name of Mr. Finch received the message on a simple pager. He walked over to the main server rack, opened a panel, and flipped a single red toggle switch. A thermite charge, cleverly disguised as a backup power supply, began to hiss, its intense heat building. Within 90 seconds, the entire physical server infrastructure would be a molten slag of silicon and steel. The second message went to the company's cloud host. A logic bomb, hidden in the kernel of the operating system, detonated. It didn't just delete the data. It initiated a recursive cryptographic wipe, overwriting every byte of data 1,000 times with random characters, then deleting the encryption keys and reformatting the virtual drives. Ethelred Logic was ceasing to exist. In the coffee shop, Julian reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a slim, silver device that looked like a portable battery charger. He thumbed a button on its side. It was a Kestrel 7 localized RF jammer, a military-grade piece of kit powerful enough to kill every cell signal, GPS, and Wi-Fi connection within a 50-foot radius. The MSS team would lose their audio surveillance and their ability to communicate locally. It would only buy them seconds, but seconds were all Alex had. Now, Julian, create the exit. Julian stood up, feigning a sudden burst of indignation. What do you mean you can't guarantee the equity structure? He said, his voice booming through the cafe, turning heads from their laptops and conversations. He gestured wildly, accidentally, knocking his scalding hot latte directly onto Lin Wei's lap. Lin cried out in shock and pain, the dark liquid soaking instantly into his khaki trousers. In that instant of manufactured chaos, Julian leaned in close, his mouth next to Lin's ear, his voice a sibilant hiss beneath the commotion. The men in the black car are MSS, State Police. They are here for you. Do exactly as I say. Walk to the rear restroom. Do not run. Do not look back. As patrons turned to stare, Julian began arguing loudly with the barista about the spill, creating a perfect bubble of distraction. Alex watched on his main monitor as Lin, clutching his leg, limped towards the back of the cafe. The spotter in the parking lot was on his phone, a confused look on his face as he realized his signal was dead. 2 more men were getting out of the Audi, moving purposefully towards the front door. Phase 2 is a go. Alex snapped to his driver. Block and hold. Go. The plumbing van lurched forward, pulling out of its parking spot and swinging directly into the path of the oncoming Audi, blocking the entrance to the lot. The van's engine stalled with a theatrical cough and a plume of white smoke from a pre-planted glycol injector tied to the exhaust. The driver, a former Delta Force operator with a PhD in Slavic languages, got out, popped the hood, and stared at the engine block with a look of profound bewilderment. He was a master of feigned incompetence. The MSS agents in the Audi were trapped. Lin Wei reached the back of the cafe. The restroom door was next to a red emergency exit. As instructed, he ignored the restroom and pushed the bar on the emergency door. A piercing alarm blared. He stepped out into a narrow, sunless alleyway filled with overflowing dumpsters that smelled of sour milk and rotting vegetables. For a heart-stopping second, he stood there, blinking in the sudden gloom, a man caught between 2 collapsing worlds. Then, a gray Honda Accord, the most invisible car in America, screeched to a halt at the end of the alley. The passenger door swung open. The driver was a woman Alex knew only as Echo, a former Mossad field agent from the Kaidan unit who specialized in high-risk extractions. "Dr. Lin, get in," she yelled, her voice sharp and authoritative, cutting through the wail of the fire alarm. Lin hesitated. Alex's knuckles were white on the edge of his console. "Move, you son of a bitch, move," he breathed at the screen. From the front of the cafe, one of the MSS agents appeared, his face a mask of fury. He saw Lin. He shouted something in Mandarin and began to run, his hand reaching inside his jacket for the Sig Sauer P229 that Alex knew would be holstered there. The shout broke Lin's paralysis. He scrambled into the Honda. Echo stomped on the accelerator, the tires smoking as the car fishtailed out of the alley and onto the street, disappearing into the steady flow of afternoon traffic. The MSS agent stopped, pulling out a phone, realizing it was useless. He was cut off, blind, and his target was gone. "We have the package." Echo's voice, cool and steady, crackled in Alex's ear over a secure, frequency-hopping spread-spectrum channel on the 2.4 GHz band. "En route to Waypoint Bravo." "Copy, Echo. Be advised, you will have company. They'll be broadcasting your description. Switch vehicles at the designated point. Do not deviate." Alex watched as the MSS agents, now realizing the plumbing van was a deliberate block, abandoned their car. One of them was speaking urgently into his wrist. a satellite communicator immune to the local jammer. They knew. "Julianne," Alex said, "get out. Standard dissolution procedure." Inside the cafe, Julian threw a $100 bill on the counter. "For the trouble," he said to the bewildered barista, and walked out the front door. He got into his Tesla, a car leased by the now defunct Ethelred Logic, and drove away. Heading north, he would abandon the car in a long-term parking garage at SFO, wipe it for prints, and use a forged Canadian passport to take a flight to Vancouver. By morning, Julian Croft would cease to exist. The game had now shifted. It was no longer about seduction and recruitment. It was about speed and evasion. Alex's van was already moving, weaving through the suburban traffic of Palo Alto, staying 3 blocks behind the gray Honda, acting as a mobile command center. On his screens, he had access to the city's traffic camera network, a live feed from a Predator drone circling invisibly at 30,000 feet, and the encrypted communications of his team. Echo. You have a black sedan closing fast 2 blocks behind you. Local law enforcement, likely responding to a tip from the consulate. Take the next right, now. The Honda swerved right, its tires squealing. Alex watched the police car overshoot the turn, its lights flashing. They had bought another minute. The exchange point was a multi-story parking garage at the Stanford Shopping Center. It was a classic piece of tradecraft. The Honda would enter, drive to the 3rd floor, and park next to a blue Ford Explorer. Lynn and Echo would get out of the Honda, get into the Explorer, and drive away. Another agent, who had entered the garage on foot, would then get into the Honda and drive it to a different exit. It was a simple, elegant shell game designed to confuse a tale. But Chen was not a simple adversary. "Control, this is Sparrow," a voice from the drone operator crackled in Alex's headset. "I have eyes on a second hostile vehicle, a dark gray Lexus SUV. It did not follow the primary into the garage. It's circling the perimeter. They're anticipating the switch. They're boxing you in." Chen was thinking 2 steps ahead. He knew the standard playbook. He wasn't chasing the car. He was hunting the asset. He was waiting to see which vehicle emerged. Alex's mind raced, processing variables at a speed that felt inhuman. The primary exfiltration point was a small private airfield in San Jose, where a Gulfstream G550 was filed for a flight to Anchorage, and then on to a final, classified destination. But they would never make it. Chen would have teams converging on all routes south. He had to change the entire plan, on the fly, with the clock ticking and a hostile intelligence service closing the net. All stations, abort Waypoint Bravo. I repeat, abort the airfield. Echo, proceed to the Caltrain station at University Avenue. You and the package are getting on a train." There was a half-second of silence. "Control, confirm," Echo said, her voice tight with surprise. "Public transport is unsecured. High risk." "That's why it will work," Alex countered, his own voice hard as flint. "They're looking for cars, for a private plane. They're not looking for 2 people buying a ticket to San Francisco. I'm rerouting a team to meet you there. They will have new documentation and a disguise for the package. Move. Now." He could feel the risk, a cold knot in his stomach. A train station was a chaotic environment, a public space teeming with civilians and security cameras he didn't control. It was a huge gamble. But Chen's strategy was one of strangulation, of cutting off the roads. Alex's only option was to get off the roads entirely. As Echo's new vehicle, the Ford Explorer, merged onto the street, heading for the train station, Alex focused on the other half of the operation. He patched into the secure channel for the team in China. "Dragon's Tooth, This is Oracle. What is your status? Over. The reply was delayed, warped by the encryption and the vast distance. Oracle. We have the wife and child. Extraction from the apartment was clean. But we have a problem. They've locked down the ferry terminal to Hong Kong. Port Authority is running facial recognition on every passenger. The primary route is compromised. The net was tightening on both sides of the Pacific. Chen wasn't just a lone wolf. He was the tip of a very long spear. He had anticipated the family extraction, too. Alex took a deep breath, the recycled air in the van feeling thin and inadequate. He was juggling two collapsing operations, separated by 12 time zones, with the life of a family and the technological future of his country hanging in the balance. He looked at the live drone feed, at the tiny digital representation of the Ford Explorer moving through a sea of other cars. Inside that car was a man who held secrets worth more than the entire defense budget. And somewhere out there, in the sea of data and asphalt, a man named Chen was moving his pieces, getting ready for the checkmate. The Caltrain station at Palo Alto was a controlled nightmare. Alex's team, a mix of former special forces and agency logistics wizards, moved with an invisible, synchronized grace. One agent, posing as a grizzled panhandler with a cardboard sign reading, "Why lie, I need a beer," was the lookout. Another, a young woman dressed as a Stanford student with oversized red headphones, was the brush pass specialist, ready to hand off the new identity package. Alex had the station's security camera feeds piped directly to his console, his eyes darting between a dozen different angles, looking for the telltale signs of a surveillance team. The men who don't look at the departure board, the couple who stands too close together without talking. Echo pulled the Explorer into a passenger drop-off zone. She and Lynn got out, melting into the afternoon crowd. They looked like any other pair of Silicon Valley professionals, a sharp-dressed woman and a slightly disheveled engineer. But Lynn's face was a mask of sheer terror. He was a man of logic and numbers, and he had been plunged into a world of chaos and fear. Brush pass in 30 seconds, at the ticket kiosk. Alex murmured to Echo through her covert earpiece. The package is a blue backpack. Our asset is the student with the red headphones. Copy, Echo breathed. The student asset moved towards the kiosk, fumbling in her purse. Echo and Lynn moved in behind her. As the student dropped her wallet, she bent down, and in that fluid motion, her blue backpack was placed on the floor next to Lynn's feet. Echo tapped Lynn's arm. He picked up the new bag, leaving his old one behind. The student picked up her wallet and walked away, without a second glance. The exchange took less than 3 seconds. Inside the backpack was a cleverly forged Canadian passport, a change of clothes, a Giants baseball cap, and a pair of non-prescription glasses. The passport photo had been taken by the camera hidden in the headrest of Echo's car. Package acquired, Echo confirmed. Moving to Platform 2. Just then, the panhandler's voice crackled in Alex's ear. Control, we have hostiles. 2 men, east entrance. Matched the description of the team from the coffee shop. Chen's men were here. They were faster than he had anticipated. Alex zoomed in with a platform camera. He saw them scanning the crowd, their eyes hungry and methodical. They hadn't spotted Lynn yet, but the platform was a confined space. It was a trap. Echo, do not go to the platform. Reverse course. Head to the underpass. Now. The northbound train was arriving, its horn blasting, the screech of steel on steel echoing through the station. The crowd surged towards the platform stairs. Echo grabbed Lynn's arm, pulling him against the human tide, towards the dark, graffiti-scarred tunnel that ran beneath the tracks. It was their only way out. Simultaneously, Alex gave another command. Badger, you're on. Create a diversion. Make it loud. The agent who had driven the abandoned Honda out of the parking garage, a man named Badger, had been waiting a block away in a beat-up pickup truck. He acknowledged the order and floored the accelerator. The truck roared down the street and slammed directly into the side of the MSS Lexus SUV that had been circling the station. It wasn't a fatal crash, but the sound of crunching metal and shattering glass was immense. It drew the attention of the police, the security guards, and most importantly, the two MSS agents at the station entrance. They turned, momentarily distracted by the chaos. That was the window. Echo and Lynn plunged into the underpass. On the other side, another car, a beat-to-hell minivan driven by the panhandler agent, screeched to a halt. They jumped in, and the van sped away, disappearing into a residential neighborhood. They were clear, for now. But the plan was in tatters. The airfield was blown, the train was blown. They were running out of options, running out of California. Control, this is Dragon's Tooth. The voice from China returned, strained and full of static. Secondary route is a no-go. They're anticipating us at every turn. We believe the package's wife may have a state-issued tracker in her phone or wallet. They're watching her electronically. Alex felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Chen wasn't just smart. He was inside their heads. He had wargamed every possible extraction route. As Alex sat in the van, surrounded by the most advanced surveillance technology in the world, he was being systematically outmaneuvered by a single, brilliant mind. He needed a new paradigm, a move so unexpected, so contrary to the rules of the game, that Chen would never see it coming. His eyes scanned the map on his screen, the sprawl of the Bay Area, the coastline, the vast expanse of the Pacific. And then he saw it. It was insane. It was reckless. It was perfect. Echo, Alex said, his voice low and intense. Get the package to the marina at Pillar Point Harbor. We're going sailing. The plan was born of desperation and audacity. There was a CIA Maritime Operations Unit based out of San Diego. Posing as a marine research group, they operated a fleet of unremarkable-looking vessels that were, in reality, state-of-the-art surveillance and insertion platforms. Alex had routed the closest one, a 60-foot catamaran named the Sea Serpent, to divert course at maximum speed towards the San Mateo coastline. It was still hours away. The new problem was time. They had to keep Linway secure and hidden until the boat arrived, and they had to do it in a region that was crawling with MSS agents and their local assets. Alex directed the minivan to a safe house, a nondescript suburban tract home in Daly City that the agency had owned for 30 years through a series of shell corporations. From the outside, it was a picture of suburban ennui. Inside, it was a fortified bunker with Kevlar-lined walls, a secure communications room, and a hidden armory. As Lynn was hustled inside, he looked broken. My wife, my daughter, he stammered, his face ashen. We're working on it, Doctor, Alex said. His voice piped into the room through a hidden speaker. It was the first time he had spoken to the asset directly. You are safe here. Just rest. We will handle everything. But he knew it was a lie. The China operation was failing. Chen's counterintelligence network was a steel trap. The Dragon's Tooth team was pinned down, unable to move the family. In his gut, Alex knew he had to make an impossible choice. He couldn't save them all. The mission was to get Linway and the secrets in his head. The family was a secondary objective, a promise made to secure the primary asset. In the cold calculus of espionage, they were expendable. It was a brutal, ugly truth, and it settled in his stomach like a block of ice. He spent the next few hours in a state of hyper-focus, a spider at the center of a vibrating web. He directed the cleanup of the Palo Alto operation, ensuring every asset was extracted, every piece of evidence erased. He monitored MSS communications, watching Chen's teams frantically search the airports, the freeways, the train lines. They were casting a wide net, but it was a net with holes. They hadn't considered the sea. As dusk fell, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the call came. Sea Serpent is on station, 2 miles offshore from the harbor, ready to receive. It was time to move. They dressed Lin in fisherman's gear, heavy boots, waterproof overalls, a worn beanie. He looked less like a quantum physicist and more like a deckhand on a crab boat. They put him back in the minivan and began the slow, nerve-wracking drive to the coast. Every pair of headlights in the rearview mirror was a potential threat, every police siren a possible end to the game. Pillar Point Harbor was shrouded in a thick blanket of coastal fog, the mournful sound of a foghorn echoing across the water. It was perfect cover. They parked near the commercial docks, where the fishing fleet was settling in for the night. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and dead fish. Under the cloak of the fog, they walked Lin down a rickety wooden pier to a small, inflatable Zodiac boat, bobbing in the dark water. An agent in a wetsuit was at the helm. "Good luck, Doctor," Alex's voice said in Lin's earpiece, a disembodied ghost in the fog. Lin climbed into the Zodiac, his movements clumsy. The small boat's engine sputtered to life, a low thrum that was quickly swallowed by the fog and the sound of the waves. It sped out into the darkness of the bay, a tiny vessel carrying an immeasurable secret, heading for a rendezvous in the open ocean. Alex watched its heat signature on his thermal imaging feed until it was just another cold speck on a cold sea. For the first time in 12 hours, he allowed himself to breathe. He had done it. He had pulled the rabbit